It was a humid afternoon, the kind that made the air feel heavy and time slow down. I came home earlier than usual, expecting the place to be quiet since my wife was away visiting her sister. The house was still, except for the distant hum of a lawnmower and the occasional creak in the floor. As I walked toward the kitchen, I heard the faint clink of dishes. That sound shouldn't have been there. I thought I was alone. Then I saw Maria, our maid, standing by the counter with her back to me, humming softly as sunlight poured through the window. She hadn't noticed me yet. We'd worked together under the same roof for nearly a year, exchanging only brief pleasantries. But in that moment, something about the way she stood in the warm light made me pause longer than I intended. I cleared my throat and she turned, surprised, before offering a polite smile and saying she didn't know I was home. We started talking, nothing unusual at first, just small things about the weather in her hometown. Yet as the conversation flowed, it began to change. Minutes turned into hours, our glances held a little longer, the pauses between words felt heavier. It wasn't sudden or obvious, but the air between us had shifted. Something unspoken was taking shape, quiet but undeniable. Looking back, that was the moment the first line was crossed, not with force but with a slow pull, like waves eroding the edge of the shore. And from there, nothing in my life was ever the same again. I sat on the edge of the kitchen counter, sipping water I didn't really need, while Maria rinsed the last of the dishes. Her sleeves were rolled up, tiny drops of water clinging to her arms, and the room was wrapped in a silence that made every sound, every glance, feel sharper. I caught myself watching her more than I should, and when our eyes met, they lingered just a heartbeat too long. It wasn't blatant, but it wasn't innocent either. When she asked if I wanted coffee, I agreed without thinking, not because I wanted it, but because I wanted the moment to stretch just a little longer. As she poured, she asked about my day, and though I replied, my mind wasn't on my words, it was on her voice, her movements, the way she absent-mindedly tucked her hair behind her ear. Maria had always been quiet and careful, never crossing any boundaries, but that day felt different. Maybe it was the solitude, maybe it was the monotony of life lately, or maybe it was something deeper that neither of us wanted to name. I asked about her cooking, and she told me stories of her childhood and how her grandmother taught her everything. Listening to her made her feel less like someone who simply worked in my home and more like someone I knew, too well. That realization unsettled me. Time passed, and I suggested she take a break. She hesitated before sitting across from me, the space between us both safe and dangerous at once. We laughed at something small, and that laughter seemed to knock down an invisible wall, not drawing us physically closer, but opening an emotional door that felt even more dangerous. I could see questions in her eyes that she didn't ask, and maybe she saw the same in mine. We both sensed we were edging toward a place we shouldn't go, yet neither of us stepped back. Not then. That evening, I kept replaying the moments from the kitchen in my mind. Maria's laughter, the way her eyes held mine just a second too long, the warmth in her voice that felt far from accidental. I told myself it was only conversation, just two people talking, but the silence that followed told a different story. You can feel emotional shifts long before you understand them, and what I felt wasn't just attraction, it was confusion, curiosity, and a dangerous sense of comfort. The next morning, I tried to shake it off and return to normal. My wife called mid-morning, cheerful as she told me about her niece's birthday cake and little family moments from the night before. She said she'd stay another day, and while her voice was full of love, guilt tightened in my chest. I hated that I couldn't focus on her words without Maria's image slipping into my thoughts, her standing in the sunlight, eyes holding something I still couldn't name. Maria herself acted as if nothing had happened. She greeted me politely, offered coffee, and stayed busy with her chores. Yet every time we crossed paths, there was that quiet current between us, pulling just enough to make normalcy feel like an act. Around noon, I overheard her on the phone in the laundry room, speaking softly. I only caught fragments. I don't know what to do, I feel like I crossed a line, before I stepped away, my heart pounding. She felt it too. That single realization shifted everything. Now it wasn't about what had already happened, but about what could happen, and whether either of us had the strength to stop it before it became something real, or worse, something we couldn't take back. From then on, I noticed the little things, the way she hesitated before passing me, the pauses in her movements, and the moments where neither of us seemed entirely sure what to do next. I started finding reasons to stay home longer, as if life itself was quietly testing us. But another thread began to weave into the story. Our neighbor, Claire, had started stopping by more often. She was friendly, but her curiosity about my wife's absence felt just a little too pointed. One afternoon, she stayed for tea, her questions casually circling who else was home and what I'd been doing. There was something in her tone that felt almost knowing, and I couldn't help but wonder if she sensed the tension lingering in the air. It felt like I was walking a thin rope with no idea where it might end. I kept asking myself, was this just a fleeting moment of emotional vulnerability, or was I standing at the edge of a decision that could alter everything? By the end of that week, the weather had turned. Heavy clouds pressed low against the sky, as though they were holding back something, just as I was. Inside, the atmosphere seemed denser with each passing hour. Every sound felt louder, every step more pronounced. My wife was set to return the next morning, and instead of relief, it brought a strange pressure, as if Maria and I were running out of borrowed time. Since the day I overheard her phone call, she had been quieter, keeping a careful distance, yet the silence between us spoke louder than anything we could say. Maria kept her distance more than usual, but when she thought I wasn't looking, her eyes still found mine. That quiet pull between us hadn't faded, it had only grown stronger. Still, we both pretended everything was fine, going through the motions. She cleaned, I worked, but beneath the surface, something was shifting. That afternoon, I walked into the guest room and found her folding laundry, my wife's clothes. The sight made my chest tighten, as if reality and temptation were standing side by side. Maria looked up, her hands pausing mid-fold. Neither of us spoke, the silence heavy with everything we'd been avoiding. I should finish this, she said softly, breaking eye contact. You don't have to, I replied, my voice calm in a way that felt unnatural, like I was trying not to disturb the air between us. She looked at me again, her eyes searching for something, maybe permission, maybe an excuse to leave, maybe both. I took one step closer. Just one, but it was enough to shift the entire energy in the room. She stood still, the fabric still in her hands, her breathing changing ever so slightly. So did mine. We were standing in the middle of so many unsaid things that even the air felt heavy. The moment seemed to stretch endlessly, silently asking for a decision neither of us was ready to make. Then the doorbell rang, a sharp, sudden break in the tension. Maria set the shirt down and slipped past me without a word. I stayed there for a few seconds, frozen, before finally answering the door. It was Claire again, smiling in that overly casual way and asking if she'd left her scarf behind the other day. But her eyes moved past me, scanning the house as if looking for something, or someone. There was an unspoken edge to her questions, a sense that she knew more than she let on. Now I had more than one thread unraveling, Maria, Claire, and my wife, who was only hours away from stepping back into this storm. Claire didn't stay long, but even after she left, her presence clung to the air like a scent you couldn't place. I closed the door, feeling the weight of everything pressing tighter. Maria had retreated somewhere in the back of the house, and I didn't see her again for the rest of the evening. We didn't speak about what happened in the guest room. We didn't speak at all. But the silence had its own language, and by now, I understood it far too well. Later that night, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet again, but the peace was gone. It was the kind of quiet that made every creak of the floor feel like a warning. I kept replaying my conversation with Claire. Her questions had sounded casual, but the way her eyes swept the room and narrowed when I hesitated felt anything but innocent. It was as if she had been searching for proof of something she already suspected. Just past midnight, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You should be more careful. Not everyone's blind. My stomach dropped. My first thought was Maria. Had someone seen something? Maybe Claire, maybe someone else. My mind raced through every glance, every moment, every exchange that could have been misread, or worse, noticed. Sleep never came easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my wife walking through the door, smiling, completely unaware of the storm brewing around her. I imagined Claire telling her something, or even showing her something. By then, the fear wasn't just about guilt, it was about the chaos that would follow if the truth came out, the damage it would do to all of us. Morning arrived too soon. I walked into the kitchen and found Maria already there. She was as quiet as ever, but there was something different in her face, like she, too, hadn't slept. The house was filled with a tense kind of silence, the sort that made every creak in the floor feel like a warning. My mind kept replaying my earlier conversation with Claire. On the surface, her questions had seemed casual, but the way her gaze scanned the room, the way her eyes narrowed when I hesitated, told a different story. It felt as if she was already certain of something and was just looking for confirmation. Just past midnight, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You should be more careful. Not everyone's blind." My stomach dropped instantly. My first thought was Maria, that somehow someone had seen us, maybe Claire, maybe another person entirely. My mind raced through every glance, every small interaction that could have been misread, or worse, witnessed. I barely slept that night, haunted by the thought of my wife walking in, smiling and unaware of the truth hanging in the air, or worse, Claire confronting her with something tangible. At that point, my fear wasn't only about guilt, it was about the chaos that would follow if everything came out. Morning arrived too soon. In the kitchen, Maria was already there, quiet but looking like she hadn't slept either. She handed me a cup of coffee without a word, her fingers briefly brushing mine. The touch was fleeting but charged, feeling like the only honest thing left between us. Softly, she said she should leave before my wife returned. I should have agreed, thanked her, and let her go, but instead I asked why. She looked at me, her eyes holding the same uncertainty I felt, and said staying would only make things harder, for both of us. Before I could respond, my phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't just words but a photo. Blurry, taken through a window, but clear enough to recognize. It showed me and Maria in the kitchen, caught in that moment of near touch. That private second, captured and sent. Someone had been watching, someone knew, and they weren't hiding it. I didn't know if this was a warning to protect my wife or a move meant to destroy me, but I knew one thing, whatever game this was, it had just begun. Maria handed me a cup of coffee without a word, her fingers brushing mine for the briefest moment. That touch was small, but it carried more truth than anything else between us lately. She looked down and whispered that she should probably leave early, before my wife got home. I should have agreed, should have let her go, but instead I asked why. Her eyes met mine, filled with the same confusion I felt. "Because staying will only make it harder," she said. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Another message, this time with a photo. It was grainy, taken through a window, but there was no mistaking it. Me and Maria in the kitchen, that split second of almost touch frozen in time. Someone had been watching, someone knew, and now, someone was waiting. I didn't know if they wanted to protect my wife or destroy me, but the game had just changed. The next message made my palms sweat. "Careful. Secrets don't stay hidden forever." My heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the knowledge that our private moment had been stolen and turned into a weapon. I looked around the house, suddenly feeling exposed. Maria saw the shift in my face and asked what was wrong. I showed her the photo. She covered her mouth, her eyes wide. "Who would do this?" she asked. I didn't know for sure, but I had a guess. The doorbell rang, sharp and urgent, over and over. I opened the door to find Claire standing there, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Maria quietly slipped into the hallway, trying to disappear from view. Claire took out her phone and spoke with a calmness that made it worse. "I know what you've been doing. I've got the photos, and I've sent copies to a backup. If your wife saw them, well, you can imagine." I tried to keep my voice steady and asked what she wanted. She leaned in, her tone cutting like glass. "I want you to end it. Today. Maria never comes back here. You tell your wife the maid quit, you move on, or she sees everything." Maria had been standing in the hallway, listening to everything, until she finally stepped into the room. Her voice was sharp as she asked if Claire had been spying. Claire turned quickly, saying she wasn't spying but protecting someone, explaining that Maria's wife was her friend. The tension snapped like a rope pulled too tight. When I looked at Maria, I saw the heartbreak, shame, and anger in her eyes. It was in that moment I realized we had already gone too far to ever go back. I told them I would confess to my wife, not because anyone demanded it, but because I needed to. Claire seemed caught off guard, asking if I was serious. I told her my wife deserved to hear it from me. The next day, I sat across from my wife, my hands trembling as I poured out the truth, the loneliness, the confusion, and the unexpected emotional pull I hadn't seen coming. She listened without saying a word, then got up and left the room. A week later, Maria was gone. No note, no goodbye. But then came the surprise, a photo sent to me. Not of me, but of Claire and my wife together at a cafe, smiling. I was left wondering who had been protecting who all along, and if this had been part of a bigger plan. Weeks passed. My wife stayed, but the air between us had changed, heavier now, as though we were both trying to figure out what our marriage meant anymore. She never brought up the photo or her meeting with Claire, and I never asked. Maria never returned. I thought about reaching out, just to make sense of what happened, but I didn't. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was respect, or maybe I finally understood that what we had shared was never meant to exist outside of that fragile, complicated moment in time. It wasn't love, it was longing. And longing has a way of clouding your vision until reality becomes hard to separate from fantasy. Claire eventually stopped coming around, and after that final twist, the photo of her and my wife, I realized I had underestimated just how deep the web of connections around me truly went. Everyone had their role, everyone had their reason, and in the end, I was left with the biggest question of all: what was I really searching for? The truth is, I wasn't unhappy, but I was distracted by routine, by comfort, by the quiet fading of the excitement that once existed. Maria didn't create chaos in my life, she exposed it. She made me confront the parts of myself I had buried beneath years of responsibility and silence. That day in the kitchen with her, in a quiet moment of emotional intimacy, taught me more about myself than I ever expected. It made me face my choices, to see my wife not as someone who betrayed me, but as someone I had stopped truly seeing. The real mistake wasn't the feelings I developed, it was allowing them to replace the conversations I should have been having at home. In the end, I chose to stay and rebuild. It wasn't easy, and it still isn't, but now there is honesty between us. Raw, painful, necessary honesty. My wife and I began counseling, slowly learning to speak again, not about blame, but about the things we had both lost sight of. Maybe that's the real story here, not one about infidelity or temptation, but about attention, and how small distances can grow into deep cracks. So I'll ask you, how much does silence cost in a relationship? And what would you have done in my place? It wasn't love, it was longing. And longing has a way of distorting reality until you can't tell what's genuine anymore. Eventually, Claire stopped coming around too, and after seeing that final photograph of her with my wife, I realized I had underestimated just how intertwined the relationships in my life really were. Everyone had their part to play, and everyone had their reasons. In the end, I was left alone with the hardest question: what was I truly searching for? I wasn't miserable, but I was distracted, lost in the comfort of routine, in the quiet fading of things that once felt exciting. Maria didn't bring chaos into my world, she simply uncovered the chaos that was already there. She made me face the pieces of myself I had hidden beneath years of responsibility and silence. That day with her in the kitchen, just a moment of quiet emotional intimacy, taught me more about myself than I ever expected. It made me see that my real mistake wasn't having feelings, but allowing them to replace the conversations I should have been having with my wife. In the end, I stayed. I chose to rebuild. It wasn't easy, and it still isn't. But now there's honesty, raw, uncomfortable, and necessary honesty. My wife and I began going to counseling, slowly learning to speak again, not about blame, but about the things we had both lost sight of. Maybe that's the real story here. Not one about betrayal, but about attention, and how tiny moments of neglect can grow into deep cracks. So I ask you, what is the true cost of silence in a relationship? And if you were in my place, what would you have done? Thank you for staying with me through this story. Life is rarely black and white, and sometimes the lessons we learn come from the most unexpected and uncomfortable places. If you found this story thought-provoking, emotional, or relatable, I truly appreciate your time and attention. Your support means the world and keeps us bringing you more real, raw, and unforgettable tales like this one. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and share this channel with friends who enjoy powerful stories that touch the heart and challenge the mind. Until next time, stay inspired, stay curious, and remember, every story has something to teach us.